Namaste, everyone. Welcome back to Ripples in the Sand, a podcast brought to you by the folks at Drifting Sands Haibun. Here we invite Haibun poets who have appeared in the journal to both read and discuss their poetry. I am your host, Sangita Kalarickal. I am a novice in the haiku path, and I'm still learning the art of Haibun. Haibun, as you may know, is a form in which prose is interleaved with haiku. In this series of readings, I hope that along with hearing excellent haibun, we also learn a bit more about the form and the creation of the piece. Today's guest has lived at several places in the United States. She currently writes out of Picayune, Mississippi, but remembers fondly how she rediscovered her love of haiku in Minnesota, from the haiku book collection at a Barnes & Noble's bookstore. Mentored by none other than the famous Jane Reicholt, our guest is currently the moderator of Inkstone Poetry Forum. She has several awards to her name, and you would definitely have read her work in all reputed haiku journals. Today, Rebecca Drouilhet not just discusses haibun with us, but also reads some of her haiku, tanka, and tanka prose. She also has a treasure of an essay that she shares with us. Hi, Rebecca. Welcome. Welcome to Ripples in the Sand.
Hi, Sangita. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. So good to hear from you, really.
Good to be here.
Yeah. So I have to tell you, today I got my modern haiku, the latest one, Winter Spring 2023, and I was reading your haiku. That is your definition, light but so deep. Will you be reading that to us, or may I?
Would you please? I don't have it handy.
Okay, it's so beautiful, folks. Autumn leaves crossing the streets before I do, All Hallows Eve. Autumn leaves crossing the streets before I do, All Hallows Eve. Rebecca, this is so beautiful and such a fitting introduction to you as a person. So welcome. And I was just wondering, is there a particular haibun or something that you would like to start with?
Well, I thought I would start with the first haiku that I ever had published. I had I was a late bloomer in the writing field and didn't start publishing until 50. I was 56 years old. And the first person to publish my haiku was the Heron's Nest.
Ooh.
And they published this haiku, Cajun Christmas. A fiddler fills the room with silent night. Cajun Christmas. A fiddler fills the room with silent night.
Thank you. So beautiful.
Yeah, and that was in December 2012.
Oh, yeah. So you said you're a late bloomer. Did all the experience before help you with your haiku?
Well, it really did. I had a lot of life experience, and, my mother taught haiku as a teacher of gifted in Ohio, about an hour, in suburban Ohio. And so I first encountered it there, and then when I was in 5th grade, I had a poem that the teacher liked a lot that was published in the school paper. But for the most part, I didn't really discover my love of writing until I attended college at age 42. But even then, I didn't pick it up until I moved to Minnesota, to Eden Prairie, and they had a giant Barnes & Noble bookstore. And
so
when I went in, they had haiku books. And so that's, I started reading and got interested, and that was kind of the birth of my writing career.
Midwest born.
So I have a couple more haiku. Would you like to read them?
Oh, please do. Please do.
Well, my husband and I live about an hour from New Orleans, about the same distance from the Gulf Coast, and not far from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And as you know, Katrina hit in 2005 and really disrupted everything. And I wrote this haiku in honor of the people who had suffered through that. Picture postcard, ghost from the city the sea took back. And it was in World Haiku Review in 2013. And it was picture postcard, ghost from this city the sea took back. I had visited one of the cities that was devastated, and someone at an antique store sold me an old postcard, of what it looked like before the storm,
How heartbreaking is that?
Yeah.
And even your haiku, so deep and so heartbreaking, just took me right back to that time when Katrina struck and all the images that we saw on TV.
Yes, it really devastated the area. Many people are building back. This is a resilient part of the world, But for some, it's been a long, hard road,
Yeah.
And then. And I also, I don't know where you want to go next, but I also have some tanka that I had written.
Yes, that would be great.
This one appeared in the fall 2022 issue of Ribbons Tanka, and the tanka is changing winds. Before I fall, let me drift, a scarlet leaf suspended for a moment in all that is autumn. Changing winds. Before I fall, let me drift, a scarlet leaf suspended for a moment in all that is autumn.
Oh, so beautiful.
Well, thank you. I chose that one because it kind of highlights my signature style or voice, which is often, the intuitive Japanese style, and a lot of times it's a little lyrical. People have mentioned to me that my poetic voice reminds them of Emily Dickinson or the Romantic poets. So I do write in the Japanese-derived style, but everybody who does that always brings in their own, slant. And
yeah. I love that you read as a tanka because later on you do plan on a tanka prose for us, right? And
yes, I do.
Along with some Haibun, yeah. What else have you got for us today?
Well, I have two more tanka briefly. This one I kind of wrote because we're all going through such cataclysmic changes. All around the globe, people are moving, migrating. We have climate change. We have refugees. But, I kind of talked about how we can still learn from history despite all the modern world, and then our challenges to meet today as modern people. And the tanka was published in the Tanka Cafe, fall 2020, when we were all going through so much, and it is bathed in the pale blue of summer. I slip into the ocean of all that's come before. Bathed in the pale blue of summer, I slip into the ocean of all that's come before.
Oh, so light. And when you started pale blue of summer, I was thinking of the sky. And then you talk about the ocean. That is awesome. That's so surprising and beautiful. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I do have one more tanka that I'd like to read at the very end of the piece, but I hope I'm not taking up too much time.
Oh, no. Please. Go for it, yeah? Were you going to read us a tanka now, or?
Yeah, well, I'm going to read a tanka. This is a haibun that I wrote in memory of my daughter-in-law, Allison, and she was from Edina, Minnesota. And when we moved up there, my second son fell in love with her. And so she was a wonderful person and came down here with him and lived for a while, and they married. But they moved back up to Minnesota and for him to go to attend a university up there, and she was killed when she was 27. And so I had written this piece for her. She died in a car accident about 2 miles from her house, and I had written this thing for her. We were all so grieved, and it took me several years to process that. that. Right after she died, I couldn't write anything, and then I started writing this real weird poetry that all the editors loved, and now several years later, I have written a requiem for her, and the requiem, it is titled Requiem. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven. Ecclesiastes 3:1 of the King James Version. Death didn't take everything, at least not yet. In the world she left behind, there is a maple tree planted in her honor in the park in Minnesota where her widower takes their daughter to play. In the fall, its scarlet leaves drift down, leaving only the naked tree. But here in the South where she lived for several years, it is now spring, and the magnolia tree she gifted me blooms. Pure white blossoms, as big as dinner plates. A jumble of memories cascades around me. Last autumn, although I was not there to see it, her daughter, Lily, my Yankee granddaughter, dressed up as Glinda, the Good Witch of the North. In the photograph, she wears a long, filmy pink dress and a silver crown. Lily is waving a magic wand and peering around a tree with a mischievous smile on her face. I wish I had a magic wand to change the past, but all I have is the drifting mist of memories. For a while, I dreamed of her, vivid dreams that felt like a visitation. In one, Allison came and hugged me goodbye. I could feel her body in a very kinesthetic way. When she finally moved to step away from me, I reached out to pull her back in for another hug. But when I did, she shook her head no, very gently, and vanished. Finally, a few months later, she appeared in my dreams one last time. She was sitting in a skiff on a tranquil autumn lake, smiling to me and waving goodbye. Last Christmas, I decorated our tree with beautiful white silk magnolia blossoms. Yes, they were out of season, but I needed to honor Allison, who loved Christmas more than anyone I ever met. The seasons come and go, but some things never change. Autumn Sea, the driftwood shapes of old grief.
Thank you.
And
Thank you
I
so
just wanted
much.
to mention, I just wanted to mention. Yeah, it was heartbreaking, but she left us a beautiful granddaughter and all the wonderful memories of her, and the legacy of people on the move. I am from the Deep South. We've been living here since for a long, long time, the early 1700s, and if my native ancestry is correct, maybe 10,000 years. But I didn't own a magnolia tree until Allison came down and gave me something, And so it's really funny how, how the whole thing has made a circle in a circle,
That's true. Do you think that this Haibun was born out of, it was a time when you could not write anything, and now, maybe this was her appearing in your dreams was her way of telling you, yes, please move on.
I think it was. That's so perceptive of you, because I had even written a tanka where she's urging me to move on. I had grieved her so hard and for so long, and then this tanka came to me where she was like saying, I'm glad you love me, but it's time to move on. You have to go, and so that's a really perceptive question, I think, because I think, but there's a process of grief. It's like grief has its own process, its own journey. But I wrote that to her not to be sad or maudlin, but just to remember what a wonderful person she was.
And it's in, and if I may, it's in your style, really light but deep, and you have a reference of nature throughout your work, every work of yours, as that I have read, so well connected with nature. That is
odd,
really very beautiful. Yeah.
I live on about 4 acres, and my global moderator that works with me lives on a farm in North Carolina of about 5 acres. But a lot of us are trying to write. Where I live, I have almost no light pollution. So I can write about the stars. I grow flowers. I have butterflies and dragonflies. And many people who are living in an asphalt jungle, that's a world they've forgotten. And there is a desire on the part of some of us to remind people, hey, you're living on planet planet Earth, because you get so caught up in the, if you see nothing but asphalt for most of it,
So true. So true.
And,
so true. Yes. So beautiful. What else do you have for us?
Well, I have a piece that I wrote called Dio de Muertos that came to me in a strange way. I was trying to go to sleep, and the poem wanted to be written, and it was almost as if some muse or outside force was pushing me. I had laid down for a nap, but it just tortured me until I got up and wrote it. And then after I wrote it, I'm like, where did that come from? But the title of it is Dio de Muertos. If I find you again, it will be in autumn. Neither of us will remember how the story ended or why the leaves kept falling long after we'd cut down the tree. I will only celebrate you then, laughing as we dance to the bright music of trumpets beneath an endless sun. There will be no taste of sorrow, just the sweetness of treats left for the dead. Time after time our shadows come and go. Between the darkness and the light, a single point of being. And that one was accepted and published in the fall issue of 2020, of 2022 by Ribbons, the Ribbons Tanka. And then I have another one. We've all, I think the whole world can relate to the pandemic. There wasn't a single person on the globe that wasn't impacted somehow,
True.
And so I had written this piece in the fall of 2021 when, we were still pretty much in the thick of it. And although we're coming out now of the pandemic, some of us, I thought I would go ahead and read it because it kind of shows what we all went through in one way or another, And the title of it is Strings. For the good are always the merry, save by an evil chance, and the merry love the fiddle, and the merry love to dance. From The Fiddler of Dooney by William Butler Yeats. I'm only half joking when I tell you I'm haunted by my vintage violin. It has a rich, deep tone that vibrates through me, its soul sinking into mine, far inside somewhere, to a place I seem to remember knowing as a child. Beyond my window, a world of color and of light. As a child, I thought I'd grow to understand the mystery I now embrace. I don't know its age. The luthier would only tell me it is very old. Stamped on the back is the name Hoff, a Jewish family of violin makers from the Klingenthal region of Saxony, dating back to the 1650s. Perhaps someone was playing this very instrument when Austria was falling to the Third Reich, and one high official after the other plummeted from power, including a friend's grandfather. My violin would know. Through the F-holes, I see a sticker, restored by F. Riccio, Marion, Ohio, 1963, the year that President Kennedy was assassinated. I wonder if Mr. Riccio was repairing it on that day. The whisper of something I dare not name, chiaroscuro clouds releasing mere raindrops until the tsunami. Isolated during the global COVID-19 panic, the violin seems like my only friend. My math teacher and I play Ode to Joy defiantly as millions perish in the plague. But the music sounds weary. Perhaps Yeats was right. The good are always the merry, save by an evil chance, and what more evil chance than a global pandemic? Where and what will we be tomorrow? The notes of a vintage violin rising to the stars. And I think
How musical.
So many of...
How musical.
Huh?
How musical.
Yeah, it's so musical, and I think a lot of us are just now beginning to understand what the pandemic did and how we're coming,
Yeah, so true.
And how we're beginning to come out of it.
Yeah.
And then the final. Did you have any questions?
No, I was just wondering, what do you like writing more, Haibun or tanka prose?
Well, what I actually do, I try to match my subject to the form that's going to best expose it. And I really like to write both. I write more Haibun because it has a bigger audience and it's easier to workshop Haibun than tanka prose. More lyrical or a deeper tanka allow you to explore things in a more, how can I put it, in-depth, emotional, feeling way. And so sometimes I will use the brevity of the haiku and the haibun to kind of punch a point home. And then if I want something more lyrical or sometimes more wistful or having something that has a longing or romantic or effect, I'll opt for the tanka prose. But I try to choose the form that I think is going to best carry forward, the theme.
Thank you. See, this makes it so clear for me. It tells me the distinction between Haibun and tanka prose in a very subtle way, very nicely done. I believe you have a essay that you wrote.
Yeah, I do have an essay. It's called Dreaming Room by Rebecca Drouilhet. The couple were galloping over the fields on strong horses, having gone to see the bush clover bloom. I could feel the wind in my hair as I rode with them. Everything about the poem felt fresh and contemporary. When I finished the tanka, my eyes fell to the date it had been published, 691 of the Common Era. It was part of the Minyoshu, an ancient Japanese record of early tanka, which were then called waka or maybe waka. I experienced them for the first time in 2012. Now, as Jenny Angiel Ward has written, deep in autumn, I am haunted by horses the color of moonlight, running like quicksilver in the wake of dreams. And that was published in Presence, March 2021. She and others have inspired me to delve deep into the intuitive poetry derived from Japanese culture that have that indefinable something, also often referred to as the tanka spirit. For me, part of the tanka spirit is the intuitive space in the poem, the dreaming room that allows the reader to step into the poem with his or her own experiences and use intuition and imagination to quote-unquote finish the poem. Tanka are cooperative effort between the author and the reader. In my opinion, this is what allows such a short poem to resonate with layers of depth and meaning. I came to know tanka as a form that could use language to get beneath language, as Michael McClintock did so brilliantly in this tanka. I've this memory, riding my father's shoulders into the ocean, the poetry of things before I could speak. And that's the tanka of Michael McClintock that was published in 2011 on Pinterest. Even a child that cannot yet speak may, like the readers of this tanka, intuitively grasp the poetry of a moment in time that defines meaning, significance, or beauty in a novel and profound way. William Leaf Teat Moon spoke of these defining times in our lives most eloquently in his book Blue Highways. For him, the moment was sharing a piece of old-fashioned buttermilk pie with newfound friends who had taken him in for the night on his long journey across the United States. For Michael McClintock, a childhood memory was poetry, and it became poetry for us as well as for himself, not through the use of excessive or impressive words, but through the sharing of an image that takes us into the experience with him. Tanka is traditionally imagistic, possessing the power and magic of images that take us beneath words to the essence of experience. Sometimes tanka can speak of the unspeakable by showing us the words that aren't there, as in this tanka by another person who has inspired me, the world-class Canadian poet Susan Constable. Orphan, widow, widower. Why not a word for those who lose a child? And she had lost a child, so I find that very poignant, and that was published in Atlas Poetica in 2010. Noting the absence of a word eloquently reveals pain that is present but unaddressed in the English language and our shared cultures. I came to tanka with the sensibility and culture of the Deep South, of a woman of the Deep South in America. I have heard the South described as like layers of an onion, where you can peel away a layer only to find another layer and another. It is difficult to get to the bottom of the story here. Part of this is because communication is often subtle, with understanding implied rather than spelled out. Tanka often functions this way, too. Consider this tanka by Canadian poet Chen-U Liu. The pieces of his jigsaw puzzle litter the floor, winter moonlight slipping through the hospice window. Tanka, first place, 2015, in the San Francisco International Competition of haiku, senryu, and tanka. What is left unsaid is powerful and may be the most important part of the poem. Most of us have unfinished business in life, almost as though our lives were an unfinished jigsaw puzzle. But in this poem, we see that the setting is a hospice. The author doesn't tell us that the patients have little time to accomplish their unfinished business in life, but what remains unsaid is revealed by the imagery of the puzzle and the knowledge we all possess about hospice and the endings in life. Our hearts allow us to identify with the unknown hospice patients, even as our empathy and intuition enable us to imagine how easily the poet's reality could be our own or that of someone we love. Our imaginations arc over the small bridge of words in the poem, cross the space unspoken, and emerge as actualized realization in poetic and emotional truth. This quality, in my opinion, contributes to the dreaming room that characterizes the best in tanka poetry. Chen-O, who has won many international contests and awards for his tanka, helped me write my first tanka. It was a failed haiku about a blues singer standing on the street corner in New Orleans. He suggested I add a couple of lines to a haiku that didn't really want to be a haiku. And voila, my life as a tanka poet was born. Chen-O continued to encourage my writing. Because of his comments comparing the following poem to Georgia O'Keeffe's 1958 painting, Ladder to the Moon, I was emboldened to enter in the Tanka Time division of the Poetry Society of Tennessee's 62nd Annual Poetry Contest, where it won first place. If only I could reach the stars. The child in me climbs the first rung of a ladder that used to scrape the sky. Another early influence in my tanka life was the famous haiku and tanka poet Jane Reichold. I studied with her on AHA Poetry website, eventually becoming a moderator of the AHA Poetry Forum. Jane was a wise and wonderful friend, and when she died, I was devastated. After her death, I came across this tanka she wrote in 1990. A dead brown seed becoming in a muddy pot, a white flower. It is a lie, you know, about death. I mean, A Gift of Tanka, copyright 1990. This July will be the 5th anniversary of Jane's death. She often wrote poetry and other works that championed women in their struggles. Inspired by her and her AHA Poetry Forum tanka moderator, Jenny Ward-Angiel, I wrote the following poem and entered it in the 8th International Tanka Festival in Tokyo, Japan, where it won a Certificate of Merit. I seem to be a woman of glass, so many panes through which to see the bending of the light. And in 2020, I entered the Sanford Goldstein Annual Tanka Contest sponsored by the Tanka Society of America, where the following poem won an honorable mention, one of only 3 awards given in the contest that year. Watercolor Poppies Blowing Across the Fields. Why is it so hard to learn from history? So many times when we write tanka, we call back memories from our childhood and our common history, as I did in this poem. Our culture and our ancestry often figure in as well. For me, these have been fertile grounds for exploration, not only in my creative writing, but also in my life. Sometimes the lines between life and poetry blur and the magic happens. I once again curl my small toes through the morning glories, twining up the columns of my grandparents' raised cottage. School child, I buy red paper poppies from old soldiers and am transported to 1918, an era of pandemic and war. For a moment, I see watercolor poppies blowing across the fields, and I am there, but I cannot stay. We are always changing, and so is life. Even when we're inspired by the past, nothing reminds us more than spring, that change is eternal and we are ephemeral. I leave you with this poem of mine, inspired by a tanka written by Tiken Yosano. The drift of white feathers plucked from a swan. Spring wind scatters us too. no trace left of who we are. And that appeared in Never Ending Story, May 30th, 2016.
Thank you so much. That
You're welcome.
Is such a treasure trove for us listeners, Rebecca. Thank you.
Well, I chose to try to bring the essay to attention because it shows the symbiotic nature of the creative community and how they, a person starts out as a relatively green poet, and it's like they said, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a village to raise a writer too, and I think that I wanted to bring that to show people how we helped and shared with one another, and we all benefited.
And when we talked before, you mentioned how this brings some insight into how a poet is born, and this is so true. That's the way you started writing tanka, which was haiku. Didn't want to be a haiku. That was a very nice anecdote.
I think one comical thing about my whole journey as a writer is I never intended to be a writer. I just kept chasing what I loved, and then one thing fell in, and then this led to that, and this led to that, and it just goes on, and I'm still learning and growing. And on our poetry site, Inkstone Poetry Forum, we have talented writers. It's an international forum from all over the world, and we have talented people, and we have some novices too. We're fairly selective, though. You have to have a real interest in tanka or haiku development or the forms. And if you do, come visit our site. We have a welcome message, and you can make inquiries, into how to join us. But we don't encourage
the site?
The site is Inkstone Poetry Forum, but we don't want a huge influx of people. But we want people that are really interested,
Oh, absolutely.
But when they are interested, we have so many people to nurture them. And like I said, we have poets from China, Taiwan, Northern Ireland, the famous poet Kalarickal from India. Yeah. And she has a site that you are familiar with, Trevini. Yes. And so when you go on the forum, not only can you develop your own poetry, but you can also network with all kinds of publishers and editors and, resources to help you grow. And so, either I'm finding the World Wide Web and the Internet to be so instrumental in helping us develop.
Yeah, it definitely is bringing the world together in a way, right? Yeah,
yes, it is.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
This has been such an unforgettable afternoon for me, listening to your sensitive work and your thoughts about the craft. Yeah. Before we go, do you have any anecdotes that you would remember from with Jane?
Yes, yeah. I do. I have two really important things. Jane was a world-class, very famous poet. She also was an artist, and she lived in Germany in a very snobby art league that never let anybody in from America wanted her, so they adopted her. And she moved all over the world. She knew the Emperor and Empress of Japan, and I think it was in the 80s, they invited her to their New Year's Eve poetry party, and she went. And she described to us what it was like, one commoner is chosen, and then some of the more illustrious poets, and then the royal family also reads their poetry. And but the royal family reads theirs 9 times, the other ones fewer times. And then at the end of the evening, you're served a beautiful cup for your tea. And at the end of the evening, there's a little paper, and you just wrap the cup up and take it home with you. So it was really interesting to me to see that. And then I also, after Jane's death, became friends with her daughter. And she named her daughter Bambi, but Bambi prefers to be called Izza. And Izza told me what it was like growing up with Jane. You know, she was a big talent, and she said sometimes she almost seemed to chafe at the mother role. And she just had, she was just a larger-than-life personality. And when she died of a broken neck. And her daughter told me that, you know, her mother had sculpted clay. She was a talented sculptor, and she had sculpted an angel that you put a candle in and the light shines out, and it had broken its neck, and she had repaired it shortly before she died. And, you know,
my God.
Yeah, so she told me, you know, but I got to see through Izza's eyes what it was like to live with a great big talent, because Jane and her husband Werner, you know, they published a magazine called Links. Jane wrote scads of books, including Enjoying and Writing Haiku, which is still a great book for beginners to learn to write haiku. And so, you know, she was just a larger-than-life personality, and for some reason she fell in love with me and wanted me to be her moderator. And so it just, you know, it was a very, everybody should have such a great mentor as Jane Reicholt. I mean, that was, you know, truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience, you know.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We would, I'd really like to, and our listeners to hear about this. Right.
Well, I thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to hearing the podcast. I'm so grateful to Richard for doing Drifting Sands. And he's been such a treasure for our whole writing community. I do have one more tanka. Do you have time for it?
Yes. I was just.
I kind of wanted to conclude with this tanka because we're all across the globe. We're all facing so many changes, and I wrote this one when I was a fairly new tanka writer. But it is White Dawn. At the ocean's edge, looking, waiting for something to take form, a seagull and I. And, you know, I feel like a lot of us, you know, we're just going through so much change. And, you know, I just wanted to end on that note because...
Thank you. Would you like to read
welcome.
that tanka one more time, please?
Sure. It's White Dawn. At the ocean's edge, looking, waiting for something to take form, a seagull and I. And Chen O published that on his blog, Never Ending Story, in 2014.
Thank you. Rebecca's books, Lighting a Path and Blue Dragonfly, are available from Amazon. The music for Ripples in the Sand is from Grand Art by Richard Graham. This is Sangita Kalarickal. Thank you for listening.